How are we going to see 30 years ahead to see if something's good or bad?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, oh shit, cigarettes are bad. Oh shit, chairs are bad.
Yeah.
What's it going to be in 30 years from now? Oh shit, those deadlifts. Here's how we do the assessment. Just going to be profile. Standing. I'm going to talk you through all this. Turn to the right, turn, like you get in a mug shot. Then, I'm going to have you come all the way back to the front. I'll have you give me your best squat, your best toe touch. And then we turn and do the same thing. Your best squat, your best toe touch. I'll give you one last one where I'm standing on one leg, lift the opposite knee. Then I'll back up to about the end of the slingshot emblem, and I'll have you walk towards me, walk back, run towards me, run back. Okay. And that'll be it. I'll talk you through all that. Just wanted you to hear it one time. Okay, turn to your right. You're good. Turn again. Perfect. Okay, face me. Now give me your best squat. Good.
Like no warm up?
Whatever you got. Good. Okay, stand on one leg. Lift the opposite knee as high as you can. Nice. Face the back wall. Best squat, best toe touch. Good. Something go with that right hip?
I have two fake hips.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. Give me your best toe touch after that. Yeah, just give me a jog / sprint towards me, 60-70%, whatever you got. Good. Nice. Turn around, walk back.
Someone that can kind of talk, because we're
Good. Turn around, walk back.
intellectuals that are going to listen to the show as well.
Okay. Sprint towards me and sprint back.
Requires us to try to like walk normal, like and try to not be like observed. You know what I mean? That's kind of the hardest part. Can't really.
Good. Turn around. Give me your best squat. Good. Give me your best toe touch after that. Good. Turn to your right. Same thing. Best squat, best toe touch. So here's where we're going to start with all three of us. This is where we start with everybody, is at the base, okay, the columns. So we call these things, the two sides of the body, we call them columns. To kind of map it out, you got a ball and socket down here at the ankle, ball and socket at the hip, shoulder, forearm. So you can look at that and kind of get your body plan right there. Spine waves from column to column to link up with the ball and sockets. But what we're looking at here from the standing profile, from the side profile, is how is everything chilling and just sitting as we are waiting to move, right? Like Mark had pointed out, hey, something looked crooked when you did that there. That's what we're looking for, right? We know that this system, because of who we looked at from the indigenous, it's supposed to be long and decompressed like the baby, like the indigenous cultures. It's supposed to have a certain amount of length to it so that these ball and sockets can then turn. Like here would be a nice clean image of how we'd want that foot and ankle complex to look. So notice how his second toe is pointing straight ahead. His inner ankle bone, the bony landmark that you could touch and see, is kind of trending higher than the outer ankle bone. Mm-hmm. Now we go back real quick and we look at the foot level right here, and you see how things have changed, right? So now the foot's more crooked. Now the inner ankle bone's dipping low and the pressure's starting to funnel to the inside of the foot. So this is there's that ball piece that's restricted, as they would call it. And then there's that gliding surface. So the ball and socket's going to be facing forward as I'm standing. So the ankle, the shin bone, has to be able to turn like this. When we collapse the arch or open the foot or get to the inside, you drop that ankle off the cliff. So now your shin's being pulled down and in, right? So now the foot's collapsed, the shin's down and in. It could basically be stated as our arch is meant to collapse. No, they want to hold their integrity. The foot's the same way. It's a platform. The foot's the base, it's an arch, it's shaped like a half dome. So it really has this sort of property to it, this sort of half dome concept where we want to funnel pressure to the outside, to the slope side. inside ankle bone high. Now we sort of funnel pressure to the outside corner of the foot.
You want to funnel pressure the outside of the foot because the inside of the foot, where the arch is a non-weight bearing part of the foot.
Right. We don't want to be landing there.
Right.
So that would just be my little lifting engine where I would dip down to the big toe and then come back out.
He would.
Or you I use the analogy of like a light dimmer. So if that makes sense, a light dimmer, right? I could turn that light on, but it could be very dim. It'd be like at a 1. I could turn that light all the way up to a 10 and it would be really bright. So if I'm standing in line at target, I need maybe a 1 or a 2 from an inside ankle bone high control. If I'm coming out the blocks or I'm coming downfield to make a tackle or I'm swinging a bat for a home run, we're going to need to see 10 show up. So when we train, we try to turn up that dial to a 10. Same thing for back chain dominance. If I'm standing in line, my back, because we'll get to that next, I might just need this. My hip's sitting right on top of my ankle, my ear's sitting on top of that, and there's my lengthened out, decompressed movement as I'm standing in line. When I'm walking, it maybe just goes back a little bit more. Then when the bullets hit, I'm this. The hip has to go way back. So now this would be at a 10. I would play the game here. I would swing the bat here. I would throw the ball here. But when I'm chilling, I kind of quiet down the system and I go back to here. So I could turn the system up real loud and make a big wave, or I could just have a small wave crashing through space. It's still the same behavior. Doesn't matter if it's in the box trying to hit a home run or if I'm standing in line at target walking down the aisles. It's still got to be inside ankle bone high because out there, we're moving.
You gotta watch out for this guy. Right?
So this little piece right here would be that ball and socket. Now it's supposed to be playing. There you go. So like that would be the collapsing of the arch, right? We want to hold that thing high. The arch shouldn't have to do nothing. It should just stay intact because this cat right here, that ball and socket, it can swivel without the arch collapsing. So a lot of this stuff, that people will talk about here where they talk about pronation or talk about the big toe, it once again comes from this idea of studying a cadaver or watching a bunch of people like us that have been exposed to a lot of chair sitting, maybe some training that's pulled us away from our natural behavior. But now we start to think that I've got to collapse my foot to get that turn inward of the shin or the ankle. Whereas when we watch the great ones move, they'll actually keep the inside ankle bone high and it'll climb even higher as they're starting to corner the hip, corner the ankle. So that ball and socket right there needs a platform. If you go back to this image of the columns, right? And if I just look at this left side of your body, just to kind of map it out, and I picture those pieces right there, those ball and sockets. This is kind of like, you could look at that as a compartment, and then you combine it or you link it to the spine. That whole column sits in the foot. Like just like we showed y'all with this right here, where now I've got this kind of plugging in, where I can plug that ball and socket into the foot. So how the foot goes, it takes the column with it, or it will set the stage for how the column is allowed to behave as I move through space.
Throwing that bar that day was just a catalyst that brought you to this point. You know what I'm saying? That it was coming. Mm-hmm. It might have been 10 years from now, but you just, like he said, you turn the volume on.
Just like it got that way, you can unglue it. Now the tricky part is, it's the same thing we'll tell people. If you're a really far WOTA, it'll take more time to recode, obviously. Just like if you were a really high-level GOATA, it would take more inputs to decode you and remove you from that space. Because like y'all know with behavior, with addiction, you could look at it from any way. Diet, we latch on to what we know and what we routinely put into our bodies, our habits. So the movement becomes no different. It's the same thing with your digestive system.
You don't want to know what WOTA means, right?
Worst of all time actions. Greatest of all time actions, worst of all time actions. I'll show you all my assessment if it makes you feel better. Mine was trash. But what I wanted to show you was that the hip is really only sitting about 3 inches off the midline. So now you look at my hip is actually closer to the belt buckle than we would imagine. I think we put our hands here and we feel the greater trochanter or the neck, the end of it, and we think our hips are out there. They're actually closer to that midline than we would imagine. So now you look at your stance and you think about it from that standpoint. The feet are outside that point. They're crooked. There's no arch there. So now this shin's getting sucked down and in, the thigh's getting pulled down and in, everything's being collapsed forward and it's pushed into this sort of front chain dominant where I'm pushing my hips forward, I'm collapsing, everything's funneling forward and in, and that's not really the support structure. If you can kind of use the IT band to think of it like a hammock that I could set the energy into, we want to sort of be in that backside, outside part of the body. And we want to be using that to power us through space. Right now, everything's sitting forward for you. So there's no security, right? Your long decompressed spine is going to come from not only fixing your spine, but fixing your feet. Because if my feet don't change, I can do all the spine movement I want. That thing's still getting pulled down and in towards the center. It's not able to decompress and lengthen out and have space like it should. So it all starts at that foot level.
Your foot's your relationship to the earth. If it's not right, then you're going to have a bad relationship up top.
And if you look at it from the side, so this is where we would look at your what we would call back chain dominance. So once again, if I'm looking at it from a standpoint of dominant behavior, not balanced behavior, or look at it as our balance is 90-10 towards locomotion. So when we're hanging out, notice where you're at. So if I go to where the pocket is, that thigh bone, that ball and socket right there, it's going to sit right about that pocket line, middle of the thigh. So now if you look at these pieces here, the ear and the hip, see how that line starts to push forward? So now that's your front chain dominance. Your hip's starting to sit in front of your ankle. So that's a compressed state. If I start to push forward, I start to compress things. If I push back, I lengthen things out and get more space. Now you wouldn't stand like this in the line of target, but once again, this is the one. So at the one, we'd want to see the hip stacked over the ankle, ear stacked over the hip. So now you see how things have been pushed forward. Almost everybody we see has that little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of crooked foot, something bringing them to the front chain. This is why the spine doesn't get fixed after some treatment or some, pain relief, because that's the behavior. It's like you ever doing dishes or you're at the counter, you lean your hips against the counter. Oh, yeah. That's the front chain. So we all just sit our hips against the counter for whatever we're doing when we're supposed to be here doing our work. So that kind of image of front chain pushing to the counter, back chain pulling your hips away from the counter and letting the system lengthen out. You can imagine that your back's probably already sore thinking about doing dishes at that position. We don't behave in this position anymore. We all rest like this because that's the chair. We're all doing it right now when we sit. The hip goes in front, everything gets shortened and compressed. So that's the back chain dominance score. That's where we want to see more of a long decompressed spine. If you go in here, you see varying degrees of it, right? I need all 10 of it here. I'm playing in a basketball game. There's a big back chain dominant movement. There's the tribes, the Harambe, I believe is what they're called, back chain dominant. This is the idea of hip behind the rib, hip behind the rib, hip behind the rib. Keeping the hip back when we move is crucial. See John Elway, there's a good look at it. Long and decompressed spine. See the tribes people, long decompressed spine.
Elway played with no ACL.
Yeah, he had lost his in an injury.
Yeah, he was pigeon-toed.
Real pigeon-toed. Like there's a good look at the walking behavior. See how that angle right there? It just makes sense. If I'm going to be going forward, I'm going to be pitching my spine forward. If I'm going to be going backwards, I'm pitching my spine backwards. That's the Olympic lift. I got to get that bar up and it's got to go this way. That landmine, I'm trying to drive it this way. So you have the two different behaviors for whatever it is that you're doing at that time. We're just saying that the default is going to be towards back chain dominance and not front chain dominance. So something where the hip is sitting back more with the ear sitting right on top, that's a cleaner presentation. This starts to compress us. This is everybody I've assessed is front chain dominant. Like you're in, the normal here. This is what everybody has. And then we take this front chain dominant position and we try to load pressure into it. So now the squat is the landing, okay? So when we're talking about your squat, we're talking about packing a bow. So when I'm talking about packing a bow, I'm talking about my landing. So that would be the squat shape that we're talking about when we say a bow. So that foot is landing straight. Here's my ankle, my shin bone. This thing's got a spiral open, right? It's moving on all three planes simultaneously. It's not flex, extend. It's not supinate, pronate. It can't be. Nothing in the organic world moves one plane, one range. Things spiral, they corner. Your ankle plays the same way. Here's my foot. My ankle's got to do this. It's got to settle into this back outside corner, just like the hip's got to settle into the back outside corner. When you do that, it looks like a bow. It has a bow shape to it. The kneecap points out. The knee's just a hinge, so we use the kneecap as a visual identifier for the client, for the coach, to say, if that kneecap's pointing out, what does that mean for the ball and sockets? They've done this. The spine marries to it because this is coupled motion technology. I mean, it's basically a flexible rod that you bend it once, you bend it twice, and it starts to turn. So it has that snake-like quality to marry to the hip. So now you can oscillate the column like this. You can load it, you can corner it, you can release it. You can load it, you can corner it, release it. You can load it in, corner it out, and release it to go backwards. So it has this spinning sort of behavior to it. So when we're looking at the squat, we're looking at the landing. We're getting an idea of when this athlete goes to land, what's the foot gonna do? We need inside ankle bone high at a 10 here. Why? I'm driving to the hoop. Look how far back the hip has to sit. Look how far out the kneecap points. Think about what will be going on with just those two bones right there. Same idea here, right? The inner ankle bone has to trend high. Look at the lace line, look at the tongue line, the sock line, everything trailing that way. Head floats in the landing column, kneecap points out. Take one more look at another image right here. Here's a good one, a Bolt. Young Usain Bolt on his good leg. Same thing, look at the kneecap. Pointing out, look at the lace line, tongue line, sock line, inner ankle bone high. Notice how the A in the Jamaica, the MA right there, is pointing outward, just like the kneecap's pointing outward. Notice how his head is in the landing column, so it's not staying in the middle. So we know we can't stop the spine from or brace it. We want to let it wave with the ball and sockets. So that whole column from ankle to hip to spine to shoulder to forearm, there's an opening quality to it, a spiral open, and then a spiral close. So the spiral open, spirals close, the foot holds steady so that I can get into that back outside corner. Now when you look at the squat and you see the crooked foot, it's impossible to get that shin to settle into that back outside corner. Why? Because I've gone crooked foot. So for you to set your bow from this setting where you're at, you'd have to be like this. So people don't do it. So they take the shins down and in, which is what you're doing right here, because it's easier for your mobility. Then when you come up, you're gonna spin them outward like that. So that's your lift, down and in, back up and out, down and in, where the locomotion would be down, back out, up, forward, in, around the corner. Just two different ways to spin energy depending on which direction I gotta go or what I'm doing. So
you see how the repetition of the exercise could change the behavior. It's all inputs, right? So that right there is the complete opposite, like Ricky was showing you. The more that input that you get, like if you love the squat, then there's no way that you're going to be able to travel through space properly. So the behavior becomes front chain, and then you could do all of the recovery work that you want. You could do, but when you get out of, if you go to the chiropractor, you walk out the door and you walk to your car, you're back in compression before you even get
Was it your left side of your back that would give you more fist?
No, it's my left side, yeah.
So like when you're going down here, notice the little bit like your right side caves in a little bit more. That's gonna push you to your left a little bit more. So what we're seeing here is, see how your head kind of shifts over to the left side ever so slightly right there?
Yeah, my butt
so
shifts.
Your butt shifts a little bit. So you're kind of hanging out on that left side. So now you got a situation where you're kind of holding pressure in one column that's compressed, and you're just beating the shit out of it. I was the same way on my left side. My left side, my head was stuck over here. My right side was spinning in reverse. And every morning I woke up, my left hip was like there was a flamethrower on it. Because it wouldn't close anymore. It was stuck in the front chain, pushed forward. There's no space to make the move. So now you see that, okay, I got to get my landing to a place where I can get my shin to open up on a straight foot. Because if I take this squat and you go and look at you can even watch the walk, watch your right foot land, it's the same thing. Crooked foot, kneecaps now pointing at us on the screen as opposed to slightly out. And then when we go to leave, the kneecap is still pointing outward and the heel is up and in. Now, if you speed this up into your run, you'll see that same behavior, you'll just see it louder, right? So there we go into land, foot gets crooked. There's your somewhat, trying to save a bow, but there's just too much collapse. So now you go in and then you snap out. See how your knee points out and your heel points in? That's because now when the momentum starts to build, that foot, your theme is crooked foot pushing the front chain. You'll see that same behavior in your standing right here. You'll see it go into your squat, and then you'll see it show up in your walk, and then you'll see it show up in your run. So this is why we say behavior. So we know if we look at an athlete and we're like, dude, their landing is shit, their squat is shit. Well, we got to get them a new squat. We got to get them a new landing immediately, because every time that Andrew lands to earth, he's landing into a compressed system. And until I get him decompressed, he's always going to be fighting compression. The only thing I can do for him is Band-Aid things or you do a surgery, take a pill. Like your options are kind of down into that corridor where we just say, let's change his behavior so he can get out of pain for not only now, but for the long run, right? And then you have a plan when you do have to go on a sitting marathon. You're going to have that day where you're in the car for a long time, you're in the chair for a long time, but now you got a plan that's closer to, hey, how do I move? How should I be moving? And this is what I'm going to do. And that's what we're going to take you all through after we get through this. Does that make sense, though, how that angle right there is crushing you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you slow it down, I can see that it makes tons of sense. The part that didn't make sense, because I could see that like there was something wrong with my mechanics, but how that actually did tie into my back, that hurting my back.
Yep, like right here, you're landing on your left side. You do a little bit more to kind of squeak out a bow, and then you see how your knee wants to start to translate in, and your heel wants to start to translate away, but it gets stuck, it hits a wall. So that same energy signature that you have, if I extrapolate it, it's like collapsed here, stuck over here, and just you're doing what I was doing. You're just pounding away on that left side. That's it's shortening up your back chain.
When we see people that come in at a heel strike and they got back pain or whatever, even in your walk, if you take and we telling you that the bow system is your landing and it's a safe landing, when we land and we go inside ankle bone high, this system, the IT band, hamstrings, quads, glutes, absorbs all of that energy, the force, whatever you want to call it. So we load into the bow and then it releases. Like he said, the volume could be different at different times. But if you're walking and you're constantly putting your heel in the ground, it's almost like you driving a car with no shocks. So the relationship to your feet and your back is, it's taking a beating all day long. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like here's a good look at a lift engine. So like when you're gonna see this a lot in squats, when the knees cave in, like that's the body doing what it has to do to move the weight. Like as much as you wanna try to push them out, you are trying to push them out right here. So see how she's dominating with her left side. See how her left side starts to drive that out more? So there's an in to out that you're trying to complete on the lift, which kind of sums up like this, where you're lifting, and you're, like that's that nice like reverse gear where you finish the lift. It would be, finishing the lift would be butt forward, heels in, and finishing the locomotion would be butt back, heels away, to give you the stark difference of going forward versus going backwards through space. So that lift engine, it's this same behavior right here. So when we go to make the move and the knee goes in to out. So you track it in off the inside corner of the foot. This is why it's sometimes advantageous for people to lift with the crooked foot, because they can kind of exploit that in to out a little bit cleaner. We would call it bias towards the finish, right? You get into that finish position, you dip in, and then you come right back to it. Kind of like you would see the GOATA stand in their finish position with almost like a corner finish, then they would load into their bow and then release the energy. Like there's a cleaner image of like the old versus the new way that we would do things. Like we don't want our athletes to have the heel on the ground. Why? Because the heel on the ground is linked to the injury, because it's going to lock up the ankle. And we could talk even more about that, but there's your difference between pivot points, where the foot gets crooked, the shin, the tibia, the ankle ball and socket drops down and in. Now his only choice is to spin it out to create torque. This cat over here is in a position where he's out, and now he could snap it in. He could corner that way as opposed to going in reverse. If you see it big picture, like this thing's just trying to spin energy, and it could do it like this or it could do it like that, it makes more sense. Because you're like, well, obviously I could go backwards, I could go forwards. I could run backwards, I could run forward. That would be how we'd want to be moving forward with a big old bow, the heel out of the... So you see his shape on the left, and I always tell people, just block your eyes to here to start. Just see these two compartments move with this third piece, and it'll all make more sense. The shin's in, the thigh's in. The shin's in, the thigh's in. They're being pulled that way because that's just how the foot's been told to behave. What we talked about before, the foot's sitting outside the column. And then look at how the head, the tracking system, is supposed to sit up here and decouple. We've got the amazing ability where I can stare at something. I can turn all these ball and sockets below it and never leave this from the target and then come back around and release. We're built to throw. We're built to attack. We're built to go forward. So we have this ability to where the tracking system just sits steady on top. Now you see where it's starting to go. So you think about how much the head weighs. Where's that thing sitting in relationship to the column? If I'm going to stand on one leg, it makes a lot of sense to get your head in that column as opposed to trying to hold it in the middle. Because where's the pressure go? To the middle. So now this cat's loading up all this pressure on the inside of his leg.
First round.
Generally doesn't end well.
First round draft pick right there.
Generally doesn't end well. You know, we try to look out for that before it shows itself because, you know, you're just predicting off of the models. You're predicting off of the blueprint.
When you guys take people off of their heel, does that just help solve for some problems instantly? Because that's the limiting factor. Is like people we just in general have like shit mobility in our ankles. Mm-hmm. So is that just kind of an eliminator for that, or is there a different reason why you're on your toes?
Well, it's how they play typically if
right,
you're dealing with an athlete, and it's where we want to load. So that pivot point that he talks about in the 3rd through 5th, kind of on the ball of the foot, mm-hmm. that pivot point neurologically could be reprogrammed through repetition. So if we go on the instep too much, we'll see people strike on the instep, which is what? Inside ankle bone low. If we see them strike on the heel, then when it loads the heel, it has nowhere to go. So there's really only one place that we can load the foot. So in an athletic setting or dealing with athletes or even our general pop people, when they start wanting to exercise or get into fitness or anything like that, we give them that as an alternative to where we never ever load the heel because it's not what we want to do. Now, if I had, somebody that's
you guys don't have people do any movement with their heels on the ground.
None. You can't move.
And you guys don't pick up any weights off the ground.
No weight from the ground.
No kettlebells, no dumbbells.
Nothing where you're gonna pull and the chest is going back and the hips are coming forward. We want to stay in that drive gear. So I could stay here, I could pull back, I could take them down deep, hold a plate to the chest, and I could rep here to where every time the butt goes down, because in essence, when your ass goes to the ground, the ankle should be climbing high. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in this squat and I'm pulling here and I'm repping right here, I could keep that hip bone on a straight line and never move it forward. So the hip and the shoulders, they just working together right here. And the first thing we cue is plate to the chest, heels up, butt goes back until we load the haunches, and then we rep right here. And all of this is getting built up. I mean, I could buy a 100-pound plate and give it to a kid if I want to. You know what I'm saying? And typically, I got linemen that come in, they squat 600 pounds, and they can't do 20 reps with a 45-pound plate like that.
Right.
And they supposed to go play on the balls of their feet.
Well, and like RDLs and like all these things that people do for the hamstrings, they're not necessarily protecting anyone from a blown out hamstring anyway, right?
No.
I mean, because you're still seeing blown out hamstrings all the time.
Well, hamstrings are epidemic in the NFL. I mean, you got guys missing a whole season with a hamstring injury. It really is.
They did a study on it. I mean, to answer your question, if you look at the way that
I'm just saying, like the way that you hear they address it is like.
Well, think about
hand raises and stiff leg deadlifts and things like that, but it doesn't seem like those things are helping.
It won't fit the spiral.
Yeah,
that's the other piece. Is that if you look at the leg musculature and how it's wound up, it's all generally going like this, winding up inwards. It's the same as the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon, the way it's sewn, runs right under to the foot. So you have this ability. You've seen Kelly Starrett do this with the ACL. You can see it with the Achilles. So there is a certain design. Like Mother Nature's sewn it a certain way. Yeah. We can't sit here and argue that the Achilles is sewn different ways. It is.
One of the big things that happen in the training industry too, from like a speed development concept and things like that is we never had the ability to look at movement from the front and back. The coaches didn't. Like the media companies owned all the slow motion video technology. So knee drive, extension, flexion, all dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. This was like, okay, you'll hear, you go to the traditional track coach and he's like, all right, you got to dorsiflex that foot. You got to pop that thing into the ground. And he's treating the knee like a piston. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what happens. That's why Nordic curls fit into that, right? Mm-hmm. Like you could lay it, get on your knees, and it's like this straight line movement. Well, if the inside ankle bone, you could have the strongest hamstring in the world, like what you asked earlier. If I go inside ankle bone low and I'm duck footed and I'm coming out of a break, I gotta take this system and swing it all the way around. It's too much stress, even for the strongest hamstring, and it don't work. It don't. We obviously.
I agree.
It don't work. So if we take and we train in that hamstring in a straight line, and then you go on the field and try to set a bow, it don't know what that is. And I'll tell anybody, like people in the fitness industry tell me I'm crazy. I'm like, the hamstring is the fucking lizard's tail. It will sacrifice that hamstring before it gives up the joint. Every time. It'll sacrifice the hamstring before the lumbar spine. It's gonna do it. And you see it happen all the time. And then I guarantee you the guy that's got hamstring trouble got a tight back.
Yep. And you got Achilles trouble too.
Yeah.
That's leading
It's
down
all
that
that,
road.
yeah.
It's like, where's it break for somebody? Some people it breaks at the Achilles or the calf. Some people it's the hamstring. Some people it's the back. But the common denominator is that, shit, they got some inside ankle bone low in the system. They got some front chain dominance in the system. The tissue that's supposed to have enough length to complete that turn, like Gary said, to complete that finishing corner, it's now being suffocated the other way. So when you go to turn it real fast, boom, it tears. It doesn't have its space anymore. If you go back and look at when you were doing your hinge from a side view, right, your birthright is to put those hands flat and to take that crease out of the knees and have all the length you want to put your hands flat on the ground with your kneecaps pointing at each other. So when you actually look, because that's my corner, to kind of complete the first assessment, this is my landing,
All right, coach, now you got to show us.
and then this is my corner. So like when I go to corner, I want to have feet inside ankle bone high. When I go to touch down, I want these guys to start doing this. So they'd be cornering here. This would be my static corner, the energy moving around, but I don't have to collapse my foot to do it. So I can stay here and turn that shin bone in without sacrificing my arch. So that would be my corner right there. Now my kneecaps point this way. When I squat, they point that way. So that'd be my bow loading, land, and then I would leave and they would corner like this. So now I should be able to put my hands flat and keep my corner. I can still feel that right back there. But that's the
Go
idea,
to
that
squat, go to your
I should
squat.
have all that length accessible to me. So we call it inside ankle bone high suppleness, meaning that when you're completing these two moves, I need to see the inner ankle bone stay high inside the column when I land and when I leave. So if somebody starts their assessment, they're like this, like we just say, it's failed. Like it's already failed. The base of the system will not hold up these ball and sockets to make the moves happen. That's why you see us always bringing the feet in and lifting the ankle bones high, because now we got a chance to get the ball and socket where it needs to go on landing and leaving.
I think one of the best things you ever said, Rick, was the foot's basically a platform for the rest of the body.
Because people think of it as a ball and socket, that it turns. It just holds steady. The turning's happening with the ankle and the hip. And we know that a ball and socket's got to turn. It's got to have a spinning quality to it. Once again, side view assessment. Based off the map, what words can you use?
Having your knees.
You only get flex and
You
extend.
want them straight.
I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, I'm trying to.
Well, that's where the stuff
After
the
we
stuff is.
after we go through that groundwork in a little while, you're gonna feel completely different in this thing.
Here's what it is, Mark,
That's wild.
There you go.
as to why.
Way in.
Look at that guy on the TV.
You see how like everything gets really far outside, right? Now, have you had the hips done yet?
No.
That's good. You can save them. Because this is that same vibe where everything points out and now we start to lose the ability to turn in. If you just think of it from a standpoint as my foot's crooked, is it easier or more difficult to get to this position, right? I'm gonna stop myself. I put my foot straight. It's like, oh, I can go all the way in now.
Right.
I got all that cornering. So when people start to get the crooked foot, just from walking crooked foot, you lose this over time. You're cutting yourself off. A straight foot inside the column, oh, it's so much easier to open and close the hip. That's why we want to start with the straight foot, because it just gives you the platform to set these moves up. So now when you come in here and the foot's crooked, the inside ankle bones are low, you kind of tilting over to your right side. See how the hands turn in? So like if we were to see it in an extrapolated form, this would be like super front chain dominant. Like push everything forward into the front. This would be super back chain dominant. Where now it's like more of a briefcase. So just by looking at how the bones want to chill, you're going to see that, yeah, I'm pushing myself into the front chain, and I'm even kind of almost tilted over to the right. See how your left hand starts to shine in front of it?
Just if I come in here on any given day, I'm usually a little sore and stuff, so just trying to pop into a squat is a little hard, but My heels don't stay on the ground for squats
Right.
regardless, so I usually just go to my toes.
So that's another one of those, like we would say to our coaches, look for the compensations in the athlete. So what we see with a squat compensation, if I know the platform wants to stay straight, and then it could just hold there and everything can turn and sit in the back chain, when we see feet start to do this and lift up, it's really just compensating for this being short. It's easier to get down like this.
Absolutely.
Right? As opposed to no arms,
Right.
no counterbalance arms, feet close together, and I should be able to sit down and chill and work down here and actually
I would not
rest.
be able to do that on the
Right,
platform.
dude. Most of us, when I first figured this out, I'm like, oh my god, like this is a birthright, and I'm nowhere close to it. Well, that would explain why my back hurts, why my knee hurts.
The reason that your hip gets stuck and everything goes forward is if you is the reason why, like what you feeling right now in your hip is because you don't have the length. So like, I know you're still gonna squat, you're still gonna deadlift.
Yeah.
I'm not here to try to change what you're doing, but I'm trying to here to give you a little more freedom to access your back chain and things like that. So there may be some prep work leading to your squat that
Right.
you need to implement from us
Right.
to kind of unstick that hip.
And stuff to do afterwards, probably to kind of
Yeah,
diffuse whatever.
a lot
I
of
just
it's
did.
going to be the
Yeah.
same stuff.
Yeah.
So to where your cue becomes, when I go, if that's what you love, we want you to do what you love, but we want you to start with some squats that are just butt go straight back, and then you may use a plate to bring you down
Yeah.
into the squat to where we could open that back chain up, and then that little stickiness.
A lot of the stuff that you guys were showing on camera of just people just pushing their hips back, you know, I was like, my body wants to do that. Like that doesn't hurt me to do that. So So I'm excited.
Yeah,
like,
none
to,
of it'll hurt.
to utilize those exercises,
Yeah.
because a lot of times whenever someone has come in with like mobility stuff or to try to like open something up, it's usually like a stretch that I maybe can't even do because I'm just not flexible enough to do it yet. Or the other thing that happens sometimes is they'll say, oh, do you feel this stretch in your, and I'm like, no, because everything else is so tight, I can't even get to the stretch that they're
Right.
talking about. you know,
Right.
so.